Especially in the modern day, we have plenty of reasons to want to set the world on fire. It's a temptation one feels, especially when we see injustice against the poor, the disadvantaged, and those who suffer. So what should we do as Christians? Should we set the world on fire? That's the premise behind Moriarty the Patriot. Set in Victorian Britain, there's no limit to the level of injustice which can be seen, from the poor father who's lost his son to an insane aristocrat, to the poor gardener who lost his child because his employer blocked access to his doctor, to the poor couple who couldn't be together because of social status. There's injustice that one can see everywhere in Britain as a result of the strict class system. So how does Moriarty combat this? We see in this setting that the police and legal systems are largely biased towards protecting the upper class, and the poor could never hope to find a method of justice which would be respected by the government. Not to mention all the grey areas of injustice which aren't properly defined by the law. Yes, the law says for certain that murder is illegal even if you're a rich person unaliving a poor person, but what if you conducted your activities in a way in which the police would never investigate you? What if that person paid off the police? Or if you were a police officer who lived in a culture in which you would be societally shamed for trying to challenge a person in power in the first place? What would you do if your son was subject to this injustice but could never receive closure as a result? I'm going to provide some spoilers for the first half of season 1 because this anime goes beyond these individual stories that I'm about to tell, but I include these because they show the great level of injustice which is inflicted but never once punished simply because of a broken system. From episode 1, we see how this father lost his son to a kidnapping and was taken away for the sole purpose of providing this guy pleasure. The worst thing about it is because of this guy's position, he doesn't get investigated. He's separated entirely from the people who kidnapped the child for him, and the father is forced to continue living life with so many unanswered questions regarding the state of his son. Looking at episode 4, where this poor couple is trying to get medical attention for their child, is it within the right of the nobleman to deny access to his personal doctor? How would a case regarding the right of the child to life and the right for the nobleman to his personal services even occur in this period of history? In episode 5, there's a case that involves an upper-class student becoming romantically involved with a commoner, and this comes to the attention of the administration of this fancy university that he attends. Now, the way that administration wants to solve this is to eliminate the commoner woman altogether, and that way the student's position as a member of an important family doesn't become compromised. What Moriarty does with these stories is operate outside the bounds of written law in order to provide some semblance of justice to these people in unfortunate circumstances. He provides them with the opportunity to break the law in order for justice to be served. He gives a father the ability to take revenge against the man who abused his son. He gives this couple the chance to poison their employer for denying their child medical assistance. He grants the student a sense of peace after provoking the school's administrator to jump into the local town's river. Now, this is really challenging to the Christian, especially as I personally process this scenario. If it was within my power to provide an opportunity for fairness to these victims of injustice, if I was in the same position as Moriarty, would I have done the same in providing these people a chance to take an eye for an eye? I'll get back to this later in the video because you may be wondering why this video is centered around the idea of setting the world on fire, and it's because that's the conclusion that Moriarty comes to. How do you change a culture where the bourgeoisie is so revered and immune from any legal consequences, and that the proletariat is so looked down upon and neglected? It's really hard to do because you're trying to get so many people in the upper class to unlearn all of their upbringing that they are indeed superior to everyone else in British society. It's difficult to change so many people's minds because they already have power as elites. Why would they give it up? Without spoiling too much, Moriarty's ultimate plan is to cause mass unrest throughout the city of London by committing a level of large-scale organized crime. He wants to set the world on fire in order for the class system to crumble in ashes so that a new egalitarian society rises like a phoenix to take the place of the old. For the Christian, as we hear of Moriarty's plan, do the ends justify the means? Surely God wants us to engage in violent, subversive activities in our society in order to build up a newer and better society society which serves all people, not just for the wealthy and the elites. And it kind of pains me to say this, but the Christian response is intended to be countercultural. Now, it really does pain my worldly self to say, because we hear these stories of injustice every day which occur, but do these stories then give us the right as Christians to engage in violence in order to enact change? Let me remind you of the context for which Jesus lived in, which was a time period where his people, the Jews, were being oppressed by the might of the Roman Empire. The treatment of the Jews under Roman occupation was absolutely humiliating. One of the methods of this humiliation was through the intense taxation of conquered citizens. Of course, the one infamous Roman law was that a Roman soldier could compel any subject of a conquered land to carry their gear for 1 mile, to stop what they were doing on the spot to assist a particular soldier. However, did Jesus advocate for rebellion? Did Jesus advocate for hatred against the Romans? In many ways, Jesus called for his peers living under oppression to actually submit to those above them. The tax, which was incredibly burdensome, was not directly endorsed by Jesus, but he taught to give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. He taught that you have heard what it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. It is a difficult thing to accept that God has instituted the governing authorities upon the earth. As Paul writes, that let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. In the face of such great injustice, it's hard not to want to respond in violence. Now, don't get me wrong, Paul's certainly not endorsing the Roman government here, because while Jesus really wanted his followers to submit to the government as much as possible in order to keep peace and stability, Paul and Jesus were themselves victims of injustice by Rome. Yet while they were victims, Christians were encouraged back then, in the face of persecution, as they are encouraged as well today, to pray for those who persecute us. The reason being is because Jesus' desire for the church as a vehicle for changing culture and changing society was never so that we would stage a rebellion and bring the downfall of the system, but Jesus' behavior is one that was consistent with working within the system as much as possible in order to spread the gospel. And it's only in the scenario where the government was specifically prohibiting the preaching of Jesus' message that the early Christians were permitted to defy that order. Now, don't twist my words here. Of course, if the government is forcing you to sin, then you should defy the government in that case. However, it's because Jesus understood that the changing of hearts on an individual level, to then a family level, to then a community, would then change towns, cities, and eventually countries. The model which is proposed by Jesus is not one in which the Christian model of government, as much as it would definitely benefit society, is not one from the top down, but is one achieved from the bottom up. To the poor, to the disadvantaged, to those who are hurting, it is not the obligation of anyone else but ourselves to help these people. It is the responsibility of Christians to help the destitute of society, and we see that throughout the history of the early church. For structural changes in government, the way to do that is to do it as peacefully as possible, with violence used as an absolute last resort. That's kind of my thoughts on Moriarty the Patriot and setting the world on fire, because I really felt for some reason just cheering on for Sherlock in all of this. As much as Moriarty's story is tragic, I was conflicted watching through this anime, and I know why. It's because I hold a Christian worldview which says so much more than what Moriarty could ever think up of. The world with its injustices may seem like it is hopeless, which is why you might want to watch my video on anime that teaches you how to hope.